The first part of this assignment is to identify the textures based off the texture type. So in looking at this particular assignment, I could choose monophonic, polyphonic, homophonic, or homorhythmic. Looking at this melody, I see that I've got 3 different voices that are doing independent things. It looks like they're actually doing the same thing, but they're doing it much later. The third one in this second voice here is just doing it all later than the rest of it. So I would label this as 3 independent musical lines, which would be labeled as polyphonic. The final part of this assignment is to label each individual line. Since all 3 of these lines are their own specific melody, and there's no one melody that's less important than another, they would all be labeled as primary melodies. So each line will get the label of PM. The remainder of this assignment is to label the texture type and then label each individual line. So each individual line will have its own specific type of label. If it's the primary melody, if it's the main melody, the most important, you would label it PM. If it's a melody that's not quite as important or shows as much prominence, it would be labeled as an SM, a secondary melody. Parallel supporting melody is like the main melody, but it may be different in a little bit in contour. Maybe it has the same contour but a slightly different rhythm. Either way, it's not quite as important as the primary melody, so it'd be labeled as PSM. SS is static support, so it would be like a sustained note or a repeated rhythm throughout. Harmonic support and rhythmic support are both combined to create harmonic rhythmic support. It can be separated. Harmonic rhythmic support provides both chords and a rhythm. But within this, if you only see chords, then obviously it doesn't provide any rhythmic support, so you would just label it as HS. If it provides only rhythms, really, and not a lot of block chords, you would label that as RS. But if it's providing both a rhythm and a chord, then you would label it as HRS, harmonic rhythmic support. You can look through the pages in your chapter just to double check, and you can see some really great examples within there to help you throughout your assignment. 7.2 has a few extra steps to follow. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to determine the harmonic rhythm. What the harmonic rhythm tells you is how often a chord changes by its specific rhythm. So for example, in the accompaniment part I have all 16th notes. What these are actually broken chords. And if you can tell where the chord changes, you can kind of combine them and figure out that on every single quarter note is when the chord is going to change here. So again, beat 1 you have a G, B, D, but on beat 2 you have an F sharp, A, and D. Those are 2 different chords, which means that beat 1 has its own chord and beat 2 has its own chord. Same thing happens in measure 2, an E, G, B, and then a D, F, B, which would be a B, D, F sharp chord. So beat 1 and beat 2 are 2 different chords. That'll continue on through the remainder of this assignment. Now that you know what the notes are within each chord, you can go in and circle the non-harmonic tones. I would recommend doing step 1 and step 3 at the same time. You determine the harmonic rhythm and determine the chord at the same time. So what I would do for measure 1 is I would put down a quarter note with a G, B, D chord, and then on beat 2 I would put down a D, F sharp, A chord in first inversion. So then that can tell me that in the melody part at the top that there are a couple of non-harmonic tones to circle that aren't part of the chord. The last thing that you do for this assignment is you would label each individual line as what its specific function is. So for this top line, I would label that as a primary melody because that is the primary melody. But at the bottom, it looks to me as though this is an accompaniment. So it's providing both chordal support and rhythmic support with those 16th notes. So I would label that as a harmonic rhythmic support. So the top line is a primary melody, the second line is harmonic rhythmic support, and that bottom line where you're writing in, you're going to write down the chord and every quarter note to show what chord has changed and when it changed. Okay? The remainder of the assignments will happen throughout this assignment will be the same way. And you basically just label and put in the chords and you should be fine. Double check those pages that they specify in the instructions to help you in case you get confused.